Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitamena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sadvajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivas Adi Gaur Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Nityananda Vadutendur Vasudha Prana Vallabha Janava Jivita Patihi Krishna Prema Prada Prabhu Padmavati Sutta Sriman Sachinandana Purvaja Bhavon Matta Jagatrata Rakta Gaura Kalevaraha Namo Namo Aniruddhaya Hishikeshendriyatmane Nama Paramahamsaya Purnaya Nivrutatmane Swarga Pavarga Dvaraya Nityam Suchisade Namaha Nama Hiranyaviryaya Chaturhotraya Tantave. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I think some of you have traveled from Hartford further down, but appreciate you waiting for us. Some of you are new. I'm seeing some new faces. Maybe we should introduce ourselves. Probably yeah. Can you introduce yourself?
This is V. Sharma. I am from Chandigarh.
Very nice. And you are you're connected to someone here, or
my son is upstairs.
Oh, achha. Very nice. You're visiting.
You met with Atul.
Yes.
Last time you came, I think one time you met with Atul. So
Achha.
Atul's there.
Okay.
He lives upstairs now.
Very nice. And what's your name?
Dharamveer Sharma.
Dharamveer Sharma. Thank you, Prabhu. And yours?
Vasant.
Vasant.
Yeah, it's
Front of an. Okay. And of course, is there anyone else who we are meeting for the first time?
I'm Gayatri.
Hi, Krishna.
I'm Pooja's friend.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, I'm here from
NewCanaan. Okay, that's nice. So you're local. Anyone else?
He's Aditya.
Oh, hi, Krishna. Yes, he's introducing himself from the beginning. He's been saying that he's wanting to get some attention. Hi, Krishna. Very nice to see you again. So anyways, I was just reflecting on what I would be sharing on the way while I was coming here, because we meet probably once in 2 months, once in 3 months, and sometimes I carry some thoughts with me across several sessions. I carry some thoughts based on my own experiences that I tend to share progressively with devotees wherever I go. So I was over in Sri Mayapur Dham for almost around 10 days. Some of you who are absolutely new to the movement of Lord Chaitanya, Sri Mayapur is the birthplace of Lord Sri Chaitanya. So I was there for almost over a week, and then I went over to the birthplace of Lord Nityananda, which is Ekachakra, and I spent almost 5 days, 5 nights there in Ekachakra Dham, staying in the ashram. So one of the things that we did this time was we wanted to kind of spend time and chant, and we wanted to reflect a little bit on what service we could offer, how we could improve, and so on and so forth. We didn't really set an agenda for us to be able to travel from one temple to the other. In other words, normally, Dham Seva would mean that you go to a Dham and you visit around 50 places in one day or 20 places in one day, because you want to cover as much ground as you have to whenever you visit India. But the idea was this time we wanted to reflect and try and understand a little bit about how we could change, how we could improvise so that we could be of better use to the mission of Lord Chaitanya than we had before. Now, one of the most important aspects or realizations that we received, a gift that we received while we were in Mayapur, in Ekachakra, was looking at the samadhis of the acharyas. The samadhi of Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj, the samadhi of Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur, samadhi of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Going back to the samadhis of the different acharyas and the Goswamis, you start reflecting on the fact that their preaching, which was done 500 years back, or their bhajan that was done 150 years back, is inspiring a worldwide movement 500 years hence. So what was the potency of the bhajan which they did, which actually carried the potency across 500 years, and it is inspiring a group of people as we sit together. We are trying to glorify the holy names in New Canaan in Connecticut. Who would imagine that Haridas Thakur, who is the Namacharya, who is the carrier of the holy names, he sat down under a tulsi tree in Jagannath Puri and he was focused on chanting the holy names under a tulsi tree. He did not walk around, he didn't get into a plane, he didn't come here to the west to preach. But his potency of chanting was such that it carried its potency across, and we are inspired by his chanting, and we chant every day remembering his sacrifice and the chanting of the holy names. Right? So is the case with all the Goswamis. Remember, the Goswamis did not have the facility to move around. They wrote books 500 years back, sitting under trees without a roof over their head, and those books are with us here. They are inspiring us. Right? Do we understand what this means? What does this mean? What is the main activity which is actually the driving force? One thing that we have to remember, that while we are on the path of Lord Chaitanya, many of you are connected in different ways, where you are trying to serve actively in temples, you are trying to improvise on your service. The mission of Lord Chaitanya requires organization. The mission of Lord Chaitanya requires resources. It needs resources. The mission of Lord Chaitanya requires infrastructure, requires training, right? The mission of Lord Chaitanya requires that we step out and we perform our bit and perform our sacrifices for us to be able to move forward. But the mission of Lord Chaitanya is not dependent on any of this. Please understand that. Please understand that the mission of Lord Chaitanya is not dependent on infrastructure. It is not dependent on our ability. It is not dependent on the use of intelligence. It is not dependent on any of this, though it is needed. Now, what does this mean, and how do we understand it in the proper context? Because am I talking two things? Am I contradicting myself by saying that it is needed, but we are not dependent? Arjuna's skills in archery was needed in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, but the victory in the battle of Kurukshetra was not dependent on his archery. Do you understand what I'm getting at? So now go back again to our acharyas. The potency of their preaching lied in the fact that they were able to chant nicely. Please remember that. The potency of their preaching was such that they had purity. The purity of their preaching was such that 500 years ago, while they wrote scripture, that scripture could surpass material energy. It could surpass the suppression of Vaishnavism in Vrindavan. It could surpass the complete covering of the entire mission of Lord Chaitanya by material energy, and it again resurfaced, and it is manifesting itself in every corner of the world. Spirituality is such that it can cut through material nature. It can never be overwhelmed. So if we want to carry our potency, and if we want ourselves to be instruments in the mission of Lord Chaitanya, the most important aspect for us to reflect on is that we have to be able to chant. The Yuga Dharma, as we say it, was preached by Krishna 5,000 years ago, right? So 5,000 years ago, Krishna came, and on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he spoke to Arjuna, and he gave an extraordinarily important message. He gave a message saying, defining what is Dharma. He gave a message of how one should be acting and following, and what one should be doing, and what his desires are. He just laid the groundwork 5,000 years ago. One of the most important statements that he made come in the 18th chapter, which is the conclusion. One can say that the 18th chapter is the end, so one should be able to find the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita right in the end, right? You should be able to see it. The same message is being repeated throughout, but then there are verses right in the end which he uses to define his mission. And what did Krishna say? He said, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyajimam namaskuru mameveshyasi satyante pratijani priyosme. The translation is, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage unto me. Thus you will come to me without fail. I promise you this because you are my very dear friend. Now he's saying, always think of me. He's saying, become my devotee, worship me. This message is being given to him, given to Arjuna, after a verse which is extraordinarily important. I'm just going to read the translation, okay? He says, this is 64. I just read 65, which is Manmanabha Madbhakto, which is an extraordinarily important message. 64 from Krishna reads, because you are my very dear friend, I am speaking to you my supreme instruction. Pay attention. When the Supreme Lord says, I am giving you a supreme attention, you got to drop everything and start focusing on that. He's saying, I am giving you my supreme instruction because you are my very dear friend, the most confidential knowledge of all. What is being shared next is most confidential. What is being shared next is most confidential. It's most confidential. It is the supreme knowledge which is being made available by Krishna, where he says, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage unto me. Krishna is a preacher who surpasses every other preacher. He was preaching on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Please understand that. And every preacher has to strategize. You cannot get in and give a class without a strategy. You got to be able to reflect on the audience. You got to be able to understand where they come from, what do they do, and how do we assist them in two things. Number one, understanding what the goals are. And number two, how do you remove the obstacles to the goal? Isn't it natural strategy? That first of all you define what you want to attain, and then you start looking at what are the obstacles that prevent you from attaining what you're supposed to attain. Krishna does the same here. The first instruction, the supreme instruction is Manmanabho Madbhakto, Madhyajimam Namaskuru. He says, always worship me, always think of me. This is the most important instruction given in the Bhagavad Gita. Right? And then what is it which he does after that? He is giving instruction on how to remove the obstacles which can prevent one from always thinking of him. Okay? It's a strategy. You got to understand, every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, one may think that verse after verse is a repetition. In reality, it is not. He is a strategist. He sets up the very important instruction on each chapter. And then he starts breaking down the obstacles that can prevent one from getting there. If you study the Bhagavad Gita in that perspective, you will understand that Krishna is strategizing, and so is the case with us. Now, we spoke of what Krishna wants us to do. He says, always think of me. Okay, we're going to get to that part in more detail. Always think of me. And then he says in 66, he wants to remove the obstacle. The moment he says, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, offer your homage unto me, the mind puts up obstacles. And he is trying to preach to Arjuna in a different way now in verse 66. He says, Sarva dharman parityajya, mamekam sharanam vraja, aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi masuchaha. This is the removal of obstacles to the previous verse. Please understand exactly how the strategy works. Now he is saying, always think of me. Okay? This is the message of Krishna. Always think of me. Krishna has to be in the center. He is the primary focus of our lives. We are jivas. We are part and parcels of Krishna. Right? We have come onto this planet and we have to make progress. You either make progress by following and adhering to the strict codes of Varnashrama as given in the Vedas, or you follow the Yuga Dharma. Lord Chaitanya, 5,000 years ago when Krishna said, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam rajaham tum sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi masuchaha, he was giving us a solution. Because every one of you who is sitting here, if you just paid attention to what I said in verse 65, I read it thrice and I said, always think of me. You must be thinking, how is that possible? I have a job. I have duties to perform which are not directly perceivable as being connected to Krishna. How do I always think of Krishna? Isn't it? This is an obstacle that should have come in your mind immediately, saying, How do I always do this? Here Krishna is telling me to do something. It seems to be inconceivable because here I am. I have an identity as a professional. The moment I get into the office, there are so many things that happen in the professional environment which are actually a big distraction for us in certain ways. But yet, we are obliged to be available. We are obliged to excel. We have to ensure that things work out the way they are so that they don't end up disturbing us. Right? We have domestic situations which can be a great distraction. Everyone here is fundamentally in a situation where there are distractions. How do you think of Krishna? How can you follow the supreme instruction and the most confidential knowledge while you are in an environment which does not support it? Once you step out of the circle of devotees and you stop chanting and you step out, the environment starts impinging on our consciousness. We are forced to respond and we do not remember Krishna. Sometimes our situation is such that our own environment is such that we neglect Krishna. Sometimes material energy is such that it overpowers us. Our need for sustenance becomes so complex that we have to make amends or make adjustments to Krishna consciousness. Krishna is giving us a message. He's saying, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. What does he mean by saying Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja? What is Dharma? What is the definition of Dharma? Anyone? I'm sorry. Okay, religion, duty. Yes. Let's hear more. What is the definition of Dharma? Dharma, the word Dharma essentially means duty that is performed that has the ability to connect us to our eternal nature. That is the actual definition of Dharma. If you act, and the action itself should be able to connect us to our eternal nature. That is Dharma. That is the purpose of human existence. We come and we take birth purely to make progress from one level to the next. For us to be able to make progress from the one level to the next, the dharma that has to be performed has to be such that every activity that we do has to have a connection to our eternal nature. That is dharma. That's the definition of dharma. Then why is Krishna making the statement, Sarva Dharman Parityajya? Why is he saying, give up all forms of duty? If indeed dharma itself is such that action has to lead you to your eternal nature, why is Krishna asking us to go against a very fundamental principle of human existence? What is Krishna saying here? He is saying that there is a different kind of dharma. He is actually saying there's variety here. He is saying Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. In that statement he is saying Sarva Dharman Parityajya essentially means there are Upadharmas, there are Chala Dharmas. There is dharma associated with the secondary aspects of our existence. There's dharma associated with the identity of us being a professional. There's dharma associated with the identity of us being parents, us being different identities of being a husband or a wife or being a citizen of a certain nation. There are so many different dharmas which one can possibly define, and Krishna is saying Sarva Dharman Parityajya. He is saying make all of that secondary. Understand that part. It's critical. Make every other dharma secondary. Understand it as secondary. I'll come to the fact as to how effective we should be in executing such dharma, but understand that it is secondary. There should be no doubt in our mind that that dharma is secondary. It should be no doubt in our mind that what we do at work is secondary. What does it mean? It essentially means Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja. Mam Ekam Sharanam Vraja is the primary dharma. That is the actual dharma because that is adhering and connected to our eternal nature. Surrendering to Krishna and keeping him in the center and starting to focus on his pleasure as opposed to our pleasure and revolving and turning around our life to suit his pleasure. This is the recommendation given in that verse. This would allow us to remember him always. Man manabhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Keeping Krishna right in the center and focusing that He is the primary focus of our lives and He is the center of our lives. Everything else is a support structure. It is also dharma, but it is upadharma, it is chaladharma, it is secondary. Do you realize what I'm talking about? So we start calibrating and we start judging our activities in every other dharma based on the ability to contribute to the primary dharma of surrendering to Krishna. So how can we keep Krishna right in the center? And what is Krishna, keeping Krishna right in the center? This was spoken by Krishna 5,000 years back. Mahaprabhu, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he arrived 500 years back, he gave the same message. He did not deviate from the message. But what was the form of Krishna that he kept right in the center? The holy names. The holy name of Krishna is non-different from Krishna. Abhinnatvam namanaminoho. There is no difference between Krishna and his holy names. There is no difference. 5,000 years ago, Krishna said, keep me in the center. Sriman Mahaprabhu, 500 years back, comes as his greatest devotee, in the mood of his greatest devotee, and says, keep the holy names in the center. That is the Yuga Dharma. So now understand this in 2012. We are right in the beginning of 2012. Our mission and objective is to keep the holy names right in the center. Revolve our lives around the sustenance of the practice of the Yuga Dharma, which is, what is it? The chanting of the holy names. The chanting of the holy names is the Yuga Dharma. Our mission would be keep the holy names right in the center and then start focusing on your life, the secondary aspects of your life, your professional aspects, your family aspects and everything, for you to be able to fine-tune these aspects so that you would be able to support the primary mission of being able to keep the holy names right in the center. This is the mission of Srila Prabhupada. This is the mission of our Acharyas. If you do that, or if we do that, if we can keep the holy names right in the center, there would be no dearth of material or spiritual resources. The secondary aspects of our existence are dependent on the primary. Please understand this. The supreme intelligence that is going to be cultivated by one who chants nicely early in the morning would be felt in the workplace as well. This was demonstrated by our Acharyas. I can give you extreme examples of this particular phenomenon as to how do you practice Krishna consciousness effectively in a manner that would extend itself 24/7. Because Krishna says, think of me always. How do you follow that instruction of thinking of Him always? It's going to start with the morning. It is going to start with our ability to take the beads and chant and call out the holy names, because that is the Yuga Dharma. No matter what you follow and what you do, if you do not align yourself to the Yuga Dharma, you are not aligned to the mission of the Lord. It's as simple as that. One can say that I get up and I do my bit, I can do this, I can do that. Yes, but are you chanting the holy names? Are you chanting the holy names with great attention? Because that is the Yuga Dharma. And if you chant the holy names with great attention, you carry the spiritual potency to your workplace as well. It's a fact. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, exemplary Acharya. Exemplary Acharya because he fundamentally did things which were extraordinarily innovative in preaching. He was a pioneer. Okay? He extended himself immensely. He was the chief administrator of the Jagannath Puri temple. Do you know what it means to be an administrator of the Jagannath Puri temple? It is an extraordinarily complex position. He was a deputy magistrate in addition to that. So he was handling cases for the British government throughout the day. It is said that he used to accomplish what used to take days for others in hours. He could compress the professional activity of what used to take days for others into just hours. Professionalism is all about decision making. If you have the ability to take the right decisions today, those decisions would have the right repercussions a week later, a month later, a year later. Professionalism is all about what am I doing now which is going to affect the future. If you have the ability to be able to take the right decisions now, it is going to have its impact positively going forward. He had the ability to compress several days' work into 2 hours. He used to efficiently finish cases. He was a magistrate, which used to take days for people. He was known for his efficiency. He wrote 100 books. Okay? And he had 13 children. Okay, those of us who think that children are a handful. He had 13 children. He wrote 100 books. He was the chief administrator of the Jagannath Puri temple. He was a judicial magistrate. And at times, for several years, he used to chant the 192 malas of the Mahamantra every day. He used to make himself available so people could come and meet him for advice. Right? He used to pace back and forth throughout the night between 10 and 4. It is seen, strategizing on how the mission could be established. This is a grihastha, just like us. I wouldn't say just like us, because he was chanting the pure names. But he was a grihastha. He showed us what is possible. He showed us that these are constraints. These are the chala dharmas, the upadharmas that we were talking about. Having certain administrative roles, being a professional, being a parent. He produced a son who established the Gaudiya mission, Sri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So if you as a parent can produce a child who can establish such a stupendous mission of Lord Chaitanya, right, then haven't you been successful as a parent? Understand this. A successful parent is one who has produced a progeny who has contributed immensely to the well-being of the entire universe. His contribution was such that it will carry on for thousands of years. So was he a successful parent? Absolutely. 13 children. And he could yet devote time and cultivate and bring forth progeny who really made an impact on the world. 13 children, hundreds of books. He was publishing and he was talking and he was an orator. He used to go to churches. Very innovative preacher. Imagine, early 19th century, for a Vaishnava to go and preach in churches, preach here, preach there. And he used to write in a Sahajiya journal, in a hidden name, just to correct them, their behavior. He used to do some bridge preaching, some secretive preaching, so that he could impact societies which were deviant. He could correct them and bring them in line with Lord Chaitanya's birthplace. He rediscovered and established the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. All of this was accomplished by someone who was married and had 13 children. The ashrama is never an obstacle. Material life can never be an obstacle to spirituality. If one is focused on what? One is focused on the real dharma of keeping Krishna in the center. If one is 100% focused on Manmana Bhamad Bhakto, I have taken Krishna's instructions into my heart. How do I remember you at all times, Krishna? Krishna makes the arrangements and provides the opportunities for such an individual. One is able to compress their work life, be extraordinarily successful professionally. It does not mean that for you to be a spiritual success, you have to end up being on retreat. No, it does not mean that. It essentially means that you have the ability to keep Krishna in the center under all circumstances. You are keeping Krishna and his names in the center, and that allows you to succeed. Because you're carrying the spiritual potency of the chanting of the holy names that you do early in the morning throughout the day. It is Krishna who is providing intelligence. It is a super soul who provides intelligence on decision making. And life is about decisions. Life is about decisions. It is all about decisions. It is all about how we process a certain environment and are able to use the environment to our advantage. Remember, you cannot control the environment, but you surely can control your response to the environment. We cannot control the office environment. We cannot control the professional environment because you have hundreds of people coming in and they're creating a complex professional environment. But you can control your response to the professional environment. You cannot control others, but you can control your response to such impulses of material nature. Your ability to be able to control such aspects of material nature, the Shakti, the strength, would come from calling out the holy names, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Nija Sarva Shakti. All the Shaktis and all the potencies are contained in the holy names of Krishna. All the Shaktis. One who has conviction, who takes up the beads and are able to chant nicely, getting up in the morning and following that instruction, will be successful. You might do anything else wonderfully. If you do not do that, there will be problems. Because now you are defining Yuga Dharma in a different way. Lord Chaitanya comes and he says a chant and Krishna's names and chanting of the holy names is the Yuga Dharma. And then we redefine it based on our own inabilities. How is it going to work out? So our being able to keep Krishna in the center is our ability to keep the holy names right in the center. Everything else is secondary. You start viewing your decisions based on that. Now, if you notice the life of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he used to ask for transfers from the British government. And his transfers were not so much for professional advancement. It was for advancing the mission of Chaitanya. At the peak of his career, where he was extraordinarily well settled, he requested a transfer to a little bit of a minor position, somewhat like a demotion. He wanted to be closer to the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya so that he could execute service. Now what I am saying here is now a secondary arrangement, which is professional life, is being sacrificed to ensure that the primary focus of being able to serve Krishna is kept right in the forefront. Can you see this? Right. This is where decision making comes in. He is constantly an utilitarian. I have to utilize my existence, I have to utilize my time, I have to utilize my connections in being able to serve the holy names. Krishna is right in the center. Me being a father, mother, professional is right surrounding it. How can I be a father, mother, professional in such a way that I take decisions which would allow me to keep Krishna right in the center? Right. And he was extraordinarily strict as a magistrate. He was extraordinarily effective, fearless. A Vaishnava is fearless. There's no fear. Fear is produced by being in this body and being in touch with material nature. One who is completely free of body consciousness has no fear. He was fearless in executing his duties. This is an example of someone who was extraordinarily involved in this world, but he was not of this world. He was in the world, but he was not of this world. His behavior was not of this world. He was in the world. Every action of his was strategized. How can I chant better? How can I assist the mission better? At the same time, take care of my responsibilities. So Krishna makes wonderful arrangements for such devotees who are constantly focused. We are extraordinarily worried because we have the ability to constantly focus on how to, for example, our mission would be, how can we keep a job right in the center? Krishna goes to the side. We do it. It's a fact. And at this time, what happens is if you keep your job right in the center, you are dependent on your intelligence. You are dependent on your karma for you to be able to maintain it. Please remember that. If you keep Krishna in the center and you want to maintain your Krishna consciousness, Krishna provides the sustenance. He gives the intelligence to how to maintain the job. Krishna says that. He says, Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi masuchaha. He says, do not fear. He is using very, very carefully, he is using words. He is the Supreme Lord. He is not to be wasting words. Right? He is Krishna. He is the absolute truth. He is the Samam Bonam. We should not expect him to be speaking whimsically. He is giving a message and telling us very clearly that, guys, keep your job as a support structure. That is secondary. Keep me in the center. And start looking at life in a different perspective. And you would find that things fall in place much better, and there's a lot, the quality of life is much better if you have such perspectives. Okay? It's a little bit of a shift in thinking which has to occur. So Krishna first gave us the supreme confidential instruction. Manmanabha madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Always think of me. And then immediately he understood that here are the obstacles. The moment I say always think of me, people will start saying, what am I going to do for a living? How am I going to sustain my family? He says, Sarva dharman paritejya, mamekam sharanam vraja, aham tum sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi, masuchaha. He says, do not worry, give up all other forms of dharma. Essentially understand that they are secondary. Remember this, Arjun on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was fulfilling the mission of a Kshatriya king. Was he extraordinarily successful? Yes or no? He was. The complex arrangement on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was such that it would have been very difficult for Arjun or anyone to excel against Bhishma, against Drona. They were extraordinarily powerful personalities. But Krishna allowed Arjun to win. It was Krishna's presence. So there was a dependence on Krishna which allowed Arjun to win despite all kinds of insurmountable obstacles on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. He was focused on doing his duty as obligated. At the same time, he knew that he was completely dependent on Krishna for the results. And Krishna took care of the results. So is our situation. This is not an impractical instruction from the Bhagavad Gita. It is not irrelevant because it's being spoken in 2012 and it is 5,000 years old. It is the most relevant instruction if we have to survive the material energy. If you have to survive the consciousness that comes through as devotees, as Vaishnavas, as aspiring spiritualists, if you want to survive the environment and the complexity of the environment that is going to be brought by, then you will have to learn to change. Right? People get elected to the White House based on such slogans. It's a fact. Change is required. Change is required. We cannot expect that we would continue doing what we did in 2011 and expect that wonderful results would follow in 2012, which would be even better than what we experienced in 2011. I made no changes. It's not going to work out. It's a fact of life. If you want to make and do things a little better, there has to be a little more involvement. There has to be a little more focus. It's a fact of life. You got to make changes, right? Did we speak for too long? We normally do. Right. We speak for an hour, hour and a half. But this is the primary instruction of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, why is it so relevant in the first class that I'm giving here in 2012? It is relevant because if we have to focus and keep Krishna right in the center, you have to have a plan. Please understand that if corporate America talks about planning, if you do budgets and planning at home, Krishna consciousness requires planning as well. Our spiritual master used to make a statement saying that if we don't plan, Maya will plan for us. Someone will do the planning. Either we do the planning or it's going to be Maya who is going to be doing the planning, because the illusory energy of the Lord will do the planning. And that won't be favorable for us to be able to execute Krishna consciousness. So very early on, right in 2012, we are in February, let's put Krishna right in the center and start strategizing. What is that which I'm doing right now which is not allowing me to chant early in the morning? What is that which is not allowing me to focus on the holy names? What is it which I should be removing? What is it which I should be adding? See, there are 4 primary activities which can be categorized as mercy, kripa. Whenever we meet a saintly person in India specifically, we say, Maharaj, give me your blessings. What are those blessings? The blessings that we ask for from the Vaishnavas take on 4 different forms. The first form is, am I able to chant better? That's mercy. Why? Because the more we are able to chant better, the more and more we are shaking off karmic reactions from the past. The closer we are getting to our original identity of being a servant of Krishna. Am I able to read better? Reading is an extraordinarily important activity. As I said before, our acharyas wrote under trees. But the potency of the scripture and their potency was such that the scriptural knowledge has passed down hundreds of years and it is reaching all corners of the world by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. He drew heavily upon the writings of the acharyas, the Goswamis, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He was a big fan of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Reading is extraordinarily important. It's a samskara, as we call it. It's an impression that is created in the minds of people. So when we take up reading seriously, it can mean 5 minutes of your time a day. Set some kind of a standard where you're going to come in touch with scripture every day. Just read it. You don't have to go for a special class or anything, which is good. You don't have to do that. Start reading. 5 minutes, 10 minutes of a day. Start doing it. People can read in umpteen number of situations. Given today's arrangements, you have computers at work, you have computers at home, you're sitting in front of a PC 24/7, you can read. But then question is, what do you read? It is always better to read scripture that has been written by bona fide acharyas, because the internet is full of writings. We would want to be able to read Srila Prabhupada's books first and establish ourselves in what he wants us to learn. And then we start venturing out to read other works. That's the safest route that is recommended. It is after all His mercy that we are all sitting here today and talking to each other. So we focus on Srila Prabhupada's books first, complete and become thorough and strong in his writings, and then we start venturing out to read other books because they would give us the potency. Take up 10 minutes of your reading. Vedabase.net, everybody knows, you probably have your own sources. Vedabase.net is a really wonderful source of all the books of Srila Prabhupada, the Bhagavad Gita as it is, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Read a verse a day. It takes 7 minutes. If you do some prayerful reading, it's an extraordinarily potent way to connect to the Acharyas. Offer a prayer to Srila Prabhupada saying, "Dear Prabhupada, please give me a message which would ground me today." Pick up the Bhagavad Gita and open the book, and you will have answers for whatever complexities that you're facing. There is something about the potency of transcendental literature. They are alive. They are not just words, they are not books, they are alive. So we spoke of chanting, mercy. We spoke of reading, it is mercy. Then what do we do after you read and you chant? What is it? What is the purpose? We want to experience. Because Srila Rupa Goswami, our primary Acharya, we are Rupanugas, he made a very clear definition of devotional service. You have to serve through the senses. You may take a checkbook and write a $1,000 check and drop it in the hundi of a temple. It's wonderful, it's welcome, but that is not considered devotional service by our Acharyas. Not discouraging you. Okay? Not discouraging you, but I'm just trying to tell you, that is not considered devotional service of going and depositing money in the hundi. That's welcome, that's piety, that's wonderful. It positions us for some sukriti. Srila Rupa Goswami's definition of devotional service is to use your limbs. You use your limbs, your senses, to engage in the service of the Lord. And the most important limbs that we use are our tongue. You start with the tongue. Sevon Mukehi, Jihva Adav. Jihva is the tongue, Adav first. You start with the tongue. You eat and you honor only Krishna Prasadam, because you're now coming in touch with Krishna through food, and every one of us eats 3 times a day, perhaps more, right? Depending on our own structure. Every one of us is eating, so come in touch with Krishna through food. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes that the holy names dance on a purified tongue. But how do you purify the tongue? It's a catch-22. You chant and the tongue is purified. He says it dances on a purified tongue. So you eat Krishna Prasadam, purify your tongue, and allow the holy names to dance. Right. So now you have chanting, you have reading, and you have service. You start serving. When you start serving, you start experiencing the knowledge that you receive in the Shastras, because your limbs are coming in touch with Krishna. Those experiences would render us being more faithful, because it's going to leave impressions on our heart. Any experience is retained in the consciousness. The more and more we experience, the deeper would be our faith, Shraddha. And then finally, after service, what do we have? I'm sorry, first you have association and then you have service. You chant, you read, you associate, and then with the aid of the devotees, in the association of devotees, you serve. This is mercy. As long as we can strategize our life by keeping these 4 tenets, constantly wanting to increase these, we would be alright. So beginning of 2012, make plans. Go back and see how much you want to devote to Krishna in a certain day. Alter your life schedule. Basically, sadhana is not 2 hours in a day. It's 24/7. What you eat, what time you go to bed, who you associate with, how you engage yourself wherever you are, all of this is sadhana, because this is what is going to allow you to be able to move forward. Right? This is what is going to allow you to move forward. So sadhana has to start 24/7. Start strategizing. What is it which is going to allow me to focus better? What is it which is going to allow me to wake up earlier in the morning? What is it which is going to allow me to do some really quality chanting? What is it which is going to allow me to read and set a quantum saying by end of the year I'll complete the Bhagavad Gita. End of the year I'll complete the first canto, second canto, third canto, wherever you are. And then start breaking down that activity into weekly parts. And the weekly parts get broken down into daily activity. And monitor your progress on a daily basis, because this plan has to be in place during the beginning of the year. By end of the year, you would see the results, because now you have made a focused attempt to remember Krishna. He would rearrange your life and he would make it easier. He would withdraw material energy so that you would be able to focus more and more. Okay? One cannot be happy in material energy. Our happiness lies in connecting with Krishna. Please remember that. You would not be here today if not for the fact that at some point you have experienced frustration with material energy. You would not be here today. Being here today is not an accident. It has been arranged. You will not be here today if not for the fact that you are seeking some truth. You're seeking some information. So he is trying to reach out in different ways in being able to share what needs to be done. Okay? So let's quickly summarize and we'll stop. We'll take some questions. So we started out by saying that the Acharya's potency is being felt 500 years hence. They chanted very simply sitting under trees with almost nothing. They used to carry their deities in cloth bags, and they used to travel from one tree to the other and sit down and chant and write scripture. This was done 500 years back, and that potency is being felt by us today. It's distributed throughout the world. So what is it which they did which was so significant? Were they dependent on infrastructure? Were they dependent on the internet? Were they dependent on, the mail service? Were they dependent on books for them to spread the knowledge? They were not dependent on any of this, even though all of this appears to be needed because it's being made available today. They were dependent on spiritual potency. They were dependent on the holy names. So was the case with Arjuna. His success in the battlefield of Kurukshetra was not so much purely based on his skill as an archer. It was needed. His success was dependent on his surrender to Krishna. So we understand that surrendering to Krishna and keeping him in the center is the primary focus of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna gives us the most confidential instruction in verse 1865. And then he removes the obstacle to following the most confident instruction in 1866. The most confident instruction is chant the holy names. Manmarabha Madbhakto, Madhyaji Mamaskuru. The obstacle to chanting the holy names is being removed in the next verse, where he says, Sarva Dharman Paritejya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. Keep me in the center. So he then starts telling us, strategize by keeping me in the center. The support structure of family, professionalism, so on and so forth, are all meant to support the primary identity of being a servant of Krishna. And we start arranging our life around such an existence. When we start arranging our life around such an existence, material energy makes it extraordinarily easy for us. It is said that, crossing the ocean of samsara, with the mercy of Krishna, it would reduce itself to the size of a calf's footprint. But the ocean reduces itself to the size of a calf's footprint because now Krishna gets involved. No one can handle material energy. No one can handle Durga Mata. Can you? No one can handle Durga Mata. She is the external potency of Krishna. She is extraordinarily strong. She is extraordinarily powerful. But then when Krishna comes into the picture, she bows down and makes it extraordinarily easy for his devotees and makes arrangements for us to connect to him. She becomes Yogamaya. She transforms herself, saying, how can I make arrangements to bring you closer? So everything revolves around that particular activity. This is exactly how Srila Prabhupada designed the movement. He gave us a lifestyle. He just did not give us simple instructions. He gave us a lifestyle. Srila Prabhupada gave us an entire lifestyle. He told us how to eat, sleep, how to entertain yourselves, how to associate. He practically taught devotees in the early days how to dress. Everything. He gave us a lifestyle. That's what he did. Why? Because the lifestyle essentially revolves around Krishna. And once we develop such a lifestyle, then it becomes easy for us to cross the ocean. And then we finally come to the fact that this requires some planning. We want to ensure that we keep Krishna in the center and constantly strategize in keeping Krishna in the center by ensuring that we can chant better, we can read better, we can associate and serve better. This should be a focus. We took the example of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who was an exemplary acharya, who had an extraordinarily complex situation in terms of the amount of time which needs to be devoted. You have 13 children, you have an extraordinarily powerful position, you have a service which is also extraordinarily demanding, and then despite all of this, he offers us so much. So he showed us what is possible if you keep Krishna in the center. His professional success was also exemplary. Okay, we'll stop right here and see if you have any questions, comments. What happened here? Did we just stun everyone? Yes. Oh, thank you. You're being very kind. Thank you.
In today's corporate America, India is different. India is like if I were in the office, nobody cares anything. And if I take time out for going to temple or it's like welcome event. But corporate America is different. So when you say like try to combine both of them together, so what exactly can you explain in corporate America?
What is the context? Well,
when I am expected to wear suits in office, I'm expected to attend my office party after office hours, which can impact my professional life. So it's sometimes very difficult to go out of reading out of the situation. So how exactly would you explain to combine?
The first thing that we do, I completely empathize. I'm using the word empathy because I work in corporate America as well. So I can empathize with your situation, with the demands that it can put on you. So I'm not completely out of sync on that. But what we need to do is this. Please understand a fundamental fact about our lives. We are where we are today because we desired it. It's a fundamental fact. We desired what we are today, and here we are. Now I'm saying, change our desires to ensure that Krishna is right in the center, and then everything else becomes a support structure. Now, when we start wondering, how is it that I'm going to be able to chant better? How is it that I can read better and associate better? Krishna manifests all those desires into arrangements that are extraordinarily favorable. Right. He makes this promise in the 10th chapter. He says very clearly that I'll preserve what you have and carry what you lack. Right? What does it mean? For someone who is surrendered and who wants to keep Krishna in the center, right? He is able to see and make arrangements that are required. I'm talking about a mental arrangement that you have to make first. This requires not external changes. This requires a change and a shift in how you are going to be setting goals. That's the reason why I said we got to write down and set goals. Once you start setting goals, then we start looking at how to execute them. When you start meditating on how you're going to be executing them, intelligence is provided from within by Krishna, and external arrangements also start manifesting. This goes back to my first statement. External arrangements that we are experiencing today are desires of ours. And Krishna is saying, do not worry. Whatever else you need for you to be able to sustain devotional service will manifest itself. This is the first internal shift in consciousness that has to occur. We have to set the proper goals in life. That's number one. Number two, what is it which we can do practically speaking in terms of action for us to be able to remember and for us to be able to move forward? What we can do is, it does not matter whether you're wearing tilak, you're not wearing tilak, whether you're wearing a suit, you're not wearing a suit. It doesn't matter, okay? It really doesn't mean that you will have to do all of those things for you to be able to remember. And I can assure you, India is worse than America. It gives you the opportunity to wear tilak, but then the pressures in India are far greater and far more intense than it is here for you to be drawn into material energy. Here, people respect individuality, they respect your own, walk of life in most parts. They say, okay, you can go on that direction. In India, it is not so. I can wear the dhoti here and nobody would raise an eyebrow. But in India, everyone would question me, saying, why the hell are you wearing a dhoti? What is this all about? I've experienced it. No one asks me here as to why I'm wearing a dhoti, but in India they question you. Dhoti? Why? You should be wearing pants. So India is far more complex. I just wanted to kind of tell you that my own experience, I was just there a couple of months back, was quite intense to see how strong material energy is. So this is not about the external arrangement. Internally, I gave you an example. You have to shift consciousness and keep the right desires. The right desires may not be intense in the beginning, but we have to write it down and understand it from scripture, come in touch with devotees who can share more insight onto it and follow that. Number two would be that in the office environment, right, we protect ourselves initially in the morning by first of all arranging and ensuring that we are able to chant. If you protect your mind, manatraye, mana is mind, traye to protect, with the Mahamantra, you automatically are able to take decisions that are favorable for Krishna consciousness. That's number one. And the second principle that you remember before you walk into the office is that this is secondary. This is secondary. It does not mean that we are going to be less effective. It does not mean that we are going to set aside things and say that it is okay, I can be lax here, I can run away home, after 3 o'clock, so on and so forth. No. We are going to go into the office and we're going to be executing and we're going to try and do our best with whatever is required. We're not going to compromise on what we need to do at work. However, remembering that this is secondary. So by remembering that it is secondary, it's a support structure, automatically it will develop some detachment towards the environment. The environment will not affect us as badly as it would if we were to keep the office environment right in the center of our lives and say that this is life. Now, Krishna is life. The office environment is supporting. So we start looking at the office environment and start saying, how can I use this part of my life to further the real duty which I have? So we start executing ourselves at work. I have seen very successful devotees at work being given a great level of freedom by the environment, by Krishna's arrangement here in America. I have seen people who work very hard if there is indeed a situation which demands such, who are very successful, who are recognized, and then who take time off, who set principles that I will not attend parties, I would not be drinking, I will not be eating, anything which is not, come in touch with Krishna. You can set principles because the office here is looking at your ability and saying he is an extraordinary asset. Okay, he may have certain eccentricities. They may call you crazy, but he is efficient. Okay, you got to allow him to exist. I have managed for around 12 years without attending a single New Year's party. Okay, not 12 years, more than that. As long as I've been here, I have never attended New Year's parties or in between office parties. People don't expect me to come. Okay, and what happens is you set your own standards. They start looking to you for spiritual advice because now you're carrying some potency. People can recognize potency. What's within us, it manifests itself. Whoever is sincere in the office environment, they start recognizing potency as well. They treat you differently. Okay? So what I am trying to tell you is 2 steps, right? First step, keep Krishna in the center. There should be a shift in consciousness. Understanding that the office is secondary, it's a support structure. Success in the office is required. This is not about not being successful. Remember, Krishna never asked Arjuna to drop his arms. He said, be successful. Even when Arjuna did not want to, Krishna said, be successful on the battlefield. So Krishna's instruction is not for us to give up and not act. Krishna's instruction is for us to act, but keeping perspectives correctly. Krishna is in the center. My job is a support structure. I go there. I'm detached. I go to the office after bathing my consciousness in the holy names. I do not step out of the house. It's like a warrior who is getting into war without wearing armor. So we chant nicely and get into work. When we go into the work environment, we do work as obligated. We work hard, we do our very best. But at the same time, we depend on Krishna to make arrangements for us so that we can keep him in the center. If our desire is to keep him in the center, he will make all the arrangements that are necessary. So this is exactly how it works. It's organic. And I've tried it, and it has worked for me here in corporate America. I am in the investment area for around several years. I was not even in, technology. Technology, you can possibly escape from these things. I've been in areas where, these things would have been extraordinarily required. But I have somehow or the other, by the mercy of the Lord, escaped. Not that I was extraordinarily focused on keeping him in the center, but some of these techniques have helped me. By setting my own rules, my own, standards, did not make me an office outcast. People kind of come to you, understanding that you have something more to offer than they ever knew. I hope I addressed your question. Is there anything else? Yes, Mataji.
Prabhu, I agree, it's very, very difficult when we work in corporate America and we have to wear suits or pants or whatever. But in the morning, what I try is to put the water fill up. If I have to go to the office, I'll put water fill up as a protection for me. And I do attend parties whenever it is very, very important that I have to attend the luncheon meeting. I have to attend it. But what I'll do is I'll have salad or something which is offered. And nowadays what is happening is managers are saying if she is going to attend, let's order veggie food. 25 people eating meat. On that luncheon, they'll order 25 people vegetarian food.
Good example.
So I take it as an opportunity. Fine, at least that 25 people eating no meat at that point and eating veggie, at least that is a service. Take it like that and pray for it. So we can definitely still work here more comfortably, still practice Krishna consciousness.
Absolutely.
More comfortably.
Thank you for sharing that experience. Yeah, this has been my experience as well. Yeah. Yes, Prabhu. Very good.
You mentioned about the books. You wake up in the morning, chant in the morning, read in the morning, and focus on the books. People that I've spoken to devotees, I feel it's very prominent in the workforce today, especially in corporate America and most of it. And you said how people can sense this potency when you come to the spiritual advice. What about in a lot of corporate America, you have the atheists who also constantly sense such potency. How can you coexist with these people? How can you actually? What's the best way of actually coexisting with such? Know that you have potency.
Okay, so the question is, I'm sorry, I just wanted to repeat because just we're recording. So the question is, people can recognize spiritual potency, so can the demons, or those who are atheistic. They can recognize potency that's the opposite of their nature, and that actually is a challenge in the sense that it manifests itself by them becoming extraordinarily agitated towards those who carry spiritual potency. How do you handle it? Here's where we depend on the holy names. So when we protect ourselves with the holy names, and we protect ourselves by chanting the Mahamantra early in the morning, Krishna provides us with intelligence on how we're going to be dealing with any of these circumstances. Any of these circumstances. Now, those who are envious of the existence of the devotees, we don't go and associate with them. But at the same time, they give us an opportunity to reflect on the complexity of material nature and how powerful it is. So every one of us have experiences with co-workers who are extraordinarily difficult to handle because they are materially situated, who become more agitated because you are a devotee. They recognize something is in you which they can't control. They can normally control others, but there's something in you which they can't control, they can't seem to keep an eye on, and they become more agitated and they try to control you, and they try to make obstacles. So be position ourselves in a different way internally to handle that. How do you handle it? The first thing that you do is you start understanding that any obstacle that is being created on the path of one who has Krishna in the center is an obstacle which is being created by Krishna himself. Develop that understanding. We buy an apple from the supermarket, we bring it in front of the deity, and we offer it to Krishna, and he accepts the apple. The apple is just matter. But when Krishna comes in touch with that matter, it becomes spiritualized. When a situation in our life which is complex is also being accepted as mercy, then Krishna gets involved in that situation and he starts giving us realizations, and we grow spiritually even from a complex situation. So that is how we benefit from certain complex arrangements. That's how we benefit from complex arrangements. You have someone very difficult to handle, accept that person's presence in the environment as being arranged by Krishna to help us surrender. A mistake that is being made in understanding this is, we think that when we chant in the morning, when we chant, the chanting is the prayer for service. We're thinking that the prayer for service can only occur in temple environments. But then Krishna is looking at us and saying, oh, this soul wants to serve me. Let me make arrangements throughout the day for this soul to come closer to me. So we're coming in touch with atheists, coming in touch with demons, coming in touch with devotees, coming in touch with environments that are not so supportive. Every one of these is being arranged by the potency of the holy names so that we could come closer to Krishna. Because when we have something insurmountable before us, we surrender. It brings us closer. So what happens the moment you start saying, oh, this person has come here, Krishna is trying to teach me something, and you say, Krishna, allow me to learn, you will learn. Because now Krishna will get involved. Even though it is just our sinful reaction that we come in touch with people who are not good. Once we start thinking that this is Krishna's arrangement, it becomes Krishna's arrangement. It's an extraordinarily potent way to bring Krishna into the picture. It's like the apple example. Bring the apple, put it before Krishna, spiritualized. Bring the situation and say this is your arrangement, it becomes his arrangement. And you start learning and growing from it as opposed to fighting it. That's what has worked for us. I'm learning and I'm just sharing whatever I've learned a little bit here and there. Anything else? Okay, I guess we'll stop right here. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.